Imagine a night submerged in silence, when even the wind seems to hold its breath, and the full moon stands vigil in the dark sky like a gleaming white eye. You see elongated shadows slipping among the trees and hear barely perceptible rustles, akin to the steps of an invisible cat. A peculiar tension floats in the air, as though the earth itself trembles beneath the burden of ancestral secrets. It is the moment when ancient tales awaken and when legends emerge from the forgotten pages of the past. With a faint shiver, you remember that there are creatures said to feed upon the vital essence of human beings, vampires, those refined hunters of the night. I invite you to let yourself be carried by thrills and curiosity on a cinematic voyage into the origins and mysteries of this timeless myth, for you will find a story woven from shadows, blood, and hope awaiting you. As we begin to unravel the thread of history, we envision the sounds of a grand orchestration, strings vibrating slowly, drums beating heavily, and a choir intoning a strange, dark theme. This is the atmosphere that has enveloped the popular imagination for centuries when it comes to vampires. With silent yet dramatic steps, we enter the realm of legend. There is something irresistibly captivating in the notion of a being that reigns over the night, possessing a hypnotic power and exuding a somber charm. Behind its mantle of dark refinement, the vampire conceals forbidden powers and an unquenchable thirst for blood, which turns it into a metaphor for both fear and desire. Yet how did these stories arise? And why have they endured for so many ages? Let us turn back to the wellsprings of the myth. From the ancient settlements of Eastern Europe, where beliefs in malevolent spirits and undead were commonplace, the concept of the vampire spread like a shadow across continents. From the days before electric light existed, when fires flickered dimly in isolated hearths, the dread of entities that feed on the life force of humans took root in popular culture. Tales of reanimated beings that rise from their graves and haunt villages to satiate their thirst were passed along orally. In the Balkans especially, there were accounts of strigoi or moroi said to return and torment their kin. Even the smallest superstitions about restless graves or uncanny markings discovered on exhumed bodies were taken as proof of the vampire's existence. Yet these scattered narratives gained a cohesive form only when brought to light by printing and the written word. Every culture seems to have its own vampiric entities. In Central and Eastern Europe, we find the classic vampire and various strigoi. In ancient Greece, there was the lamia. In Slavic mythology, one might encounter the vrikolakas. While in Asia, such as in China, there is the jiangshi, a sort of hopping corpse endowed with malevolent powers. And in the Philippines, there is the aswang, a vampiric spirit in multiple guises. Although their names, appearances, and specifics vary, the central notion remains the same: a being suspended between life and death that nourishes itself on human vital energy. This universality suggests that the vampire metaphor strikes a sensitive chord in the human subconscious, symbolizing fear of the unknown, anxiety toward mortality, and at the same time, the desire to transcend life's boundaries. Over the centuries, the belief in vampires seeped into funerary rituals, influenced perspectives on death, and played a role in defining the sacred and the profane. During the Middle Ages, devastating epidemics and a lack of scientific understanding intensified the dread of the risen dead. In many villages, corpses were exhumed, and if they showed signs that seemed unnaturally fresh, it was believed the deceased must be a vampire. Various methods were employed to prevent its return. A stake was driven through the heart, the head and limbs were severed, or religious rites were performed to keep the unholy at bay. Although today we know that decomposition can have odd manifestations, including fluids that might look like fresh blood at the mouth, people of that era deemed such signs indisputable evidence of a vampire. Later on, the emergence of prominent written accounts, such as Austrian reports of vampire activity in the Balkans, as well as Bram Stoker's famous work, Dracula, cemented the vampire's image in Western consciousness as a sophisticated yet malevolent and seductive figure. Vampire mythology depicts it as a graceful predator of the night, endowed with dark powers and perpetually drawn to blood. Often, in classic literature and folklore, vampires were portrayed as extremely pale individuals, with gleaming eyes and a noble aspect, or conversely, in some traditions, as repellent creatures whose faces were distorted by thirst and fury. In modern interpretations, the elegant side of the vampire has taken center stage, clad in refined attire, moving with inhuman grace, and able to subjugate victims by a mere gaze or through hypnotic abilities. This duality, sophistication and monstrosity, has elevated it as one of the most potent symbols of repressed desire and the hidden danger lurking behind an attractive facade. The vampire's magnetism arises chiefly from its supernatural essence. It is believed to possess physical strength and agility far exceeding those of ordinary humans. Additionally, tradition attributes to it the power to change into a bat, a wolf, or even mist, disappearing without a trace or penetrating well-guarded places. Some vampires can control night creatures like bats or wolves and can manipulate the human mind, instilling fascination or terror. Their might is inseparable from the very substance of blood, which grants them eternal youth, regenerative ability, and in certain tales even the power of flight. All these traits make them icons of perilous seduction, a power that comes with a merciless price, insatiable thirst and perpetual torment. Though vampires may seem invincible, both folklore and world literature have given voice to their frailties. Sunlight is, in most legends, the vampire's greatest enemy. A single beam can wound, burn, or even reduce it to ash. Then there is garlic, its strong scent and perceived purifying properties able to repel or weaken the creature. Holy symbols like crosses or holy water constitute formidable barriers, for the vampire is seen as a cursed being spurned by Christian sanctity. The most renowned and dramatic means of vanquishing it remains driving a stake through its heart, a ritual that signifies the triumph of life over unnatural death and puts an absolute end to the vampire's existence. This mix of overwhelming powers and unmistakable vulnerabilities intensifies its mystique and keeps collective fascination alive. The vampire is not merely a nightmare creature, but also a symbol charged with countless meanings. At its core, it represents the fear of dying paired with the longing for immortality, challenging the boundary between life and death. Psychologically, the vampire can be viewed as temptation that corrupts and devours the human side of us all, the lust for power, the fixation on youth, and the dangerous allure of the forbidden. Hence, it is no surprise that literature, theatre, and film have embraced this theme, producing, across time, spellbinding stories of dignified aristocrats reigning over dark castles, as well as emotionless beasts that stalk in the shadows. Each era and culture projects onto the vampire screen its own worries and hopes, making the creature a vehicle for the collective imagination. In a broader context, the vampire is akin to other nocturnal or undying beings. For instance, Romanian folklore includes strigoi, who occasionally rise from their graves, haunting relatives, affecting harvests, and leaving a mark on community life. In other places, tales speak of varkolachi, creatures that can cause eclipses or devour fragments of the moon. In some versions, they share traits with vampiric nature. Similarly, Celtic or Germanic traditions mention the living dead returning with supernatural powers, driven by vengeance or unfulfilled passions. This diversity of entities shows that the concept of returning from the dead and feeding on others' vitality is a common thread across world mythologies, while the vampire merely stands as the best-known archetype, shining in a gothic and seductive light. The relationship between vampires and humankind plays out on a razor's edge. On one hand, people have always feared the prospect of a nocturnal predator, yet on the other, they have been enchanted by its irresistible aura. In legends, the vampire roams through villages, spreading fear and death. However, in romantic tales, it becomes a tormented spirit, a soul doomed to loneliness and isolation, which, beneath an evil mask, hides a piercing longing for human warmth. This complexity has fueled thousands of stories and legends, and for the people of the Middle Ages, the belief in a vampire's reality shaped social customs. It was thought that a vampire could form an emotional bond with a victim, linking them through a blood ritual while also holding the power to claim the victim's life at any moment. Amid this backdrop, fear and seduction meld in a mesmerizing dance of shadows. Faith in vampires was not only an act of imagination. In rural areas, people actually performed protective rituals, sprinkling garlic on doorsteps or adorning windows with religious emblems to keep such entities away. Over time, as the myth spread, artists, writers, and prominent figures found themselves enthralled by its dramatic potential. From vampire plays that took over European stages in the 18th and 19th centuries to the controversial Nosferatu of the silent film era and the countless cinematic adaptations that followed, the vampire has left its stamp on cultural creations. Furthermore, political figures have sometimes been labeled as vampires, either to demonize them or to highlight their greed for power and the way they drain the people's lifeblood. These parallels give the myth a timeless quality, proving its versatility across religious and socio-political frameworks. Picture living in a medieval village, lacking electricity and public lighting, where each night falls like a curtain of pitch. In such conditions, any eerie sound could be interpreted as the diabolic presence of a vampire. People kept candles lit all night long, gathered under one roof for collective safety, and recited prayers designed to shield them from forces of darkness. Some families drove iron crosses into the ground near their dwellings or traced symbols in ash by their thresholds. When a neighbor died suddenly, rumors that he would come back gained momentum, and that communal anxiety might lead to extreme measures, exhumations, religious incantations, and grim rituals meant to safeguard the living realm. Though such scenes may seem unimaginable today, they reveal the extraordinary hold this myth once had on the collective psyche. In certain stories, the vampire is not purely a villain, but rather a paradoxical guardian of specific communities or families, provided they enter a mutually beneficial agreement. Some versions suggest that by receiving blood in a ritualistic fashion, the vampire could ensure prosperity or protection against other malevolent forces. Naturally, these depictions are far less common and often intermingle with elements of magic or witchcraft. Regardless, the notion that a vampire can serve a beneficial role underscores its mythic complexity. Sometimes legends imply that a former hero or a gifted healer might fall from grace and turn into a vampire, yet still retain a desire to aid their people, forging a sort of truce between worlds. This blend of horror and hope has endowed the vampire with a rare versatility among myths. With the rise of modern science, researchers have attempted to rationalize vampirism through medical conditions such as porphyria or rabies, or through misconceptions about natural decay processes. Others have seen belief in vampires as a psychological response to the dread of disease and death. Certain psychiatrists have connected the notion of consuming vital energy to emotional vampirism, viewing it as a metaphor for manipulative personalities. From a folkloric angle, many specialists consider that the myth formed through the overlap of ancient beliefs in evil spirits and historical phenomena like epidemics and inexplicable deaths. Today, vampires remain a topic studied by ethnologists and anthropologists alike, as a way to understand how society deals with fear, mortality, and the unknown. Although the majority of scientists deem the vampire a mythical and literary figure, there are still groups fascinated by paranormal and cryptozoological phenomena who argue that real vampires could exist, either misunderstood or overlooked. Some maintain that there may be beings with genetic anomalies allowing them to process blood components differently. Others venture further, believing in a hidden race of nocturnal creatures, perhaps dwelling underground or in extremely isolated regions. These notions remain speculative and unsupported by solid evidence. Yet the intrigue of such a mystery and the possibility that some trace of real vampires might be out there have sparked expeditions, urban hunts, and amateur investigations, perpetuating interest in a legend that seems never to wither. As the world changes, so does the vampire. In modern times, we have witnessed its transformation into lavish cinematic trilogies, television series, video games, and themes for cosplay or specialized conventions. Each reinterpretation brings new components. Vampires can be genuinely tragic heroes in love with mortals, or they might have civic awareness, or perhaps they are torn between their bestial side and noble ideals. In other variations, they serve as metaphors for infectious disease or addiction, mirroring the predicaments of contemporary society. This ability of the myth to metamorphose shows that the vampire is a vibrant cultural organism, able to adapt to any era and sensibility while still retaining its fundamental core: lethal thirst and a fascination with what instills dread in us. Beyond fiction, there are individuals and groups devoted to paranormal inquiries who travel to places rumored to be haunted by vampires. Bran Castle, though more historically linked to Vlad Tepes, often associated with the inspiration for Dracula, remains a tourist magnet for those seeking to approach the true home of vampires. Amateur researchers frequently hold overnight camps equipped with infrared cameras, audio recorders, and devices intended to detect spirit energy. Typically, they do not uncover conclusive phenomena, yet the excitement, speculation, and hope that something lies out there in the darkness only intensify the legend. Documentaries, media stories, interviews with alleged victims, or modern vampires who claim they need blood to feel revitalized. All of these nourish the myth's aura, reinforcing the notion that it has not died out but merely adapted to current times. Today, looking back on ages of fear and fascination, we see that the vampire has firmly taken root in global culture. From books and stage plays to Hollywood productions and streaming platforms, it remains an undeniable topic of interest. The vampire is linked to the idea of lethal seduction, an eroticization of death, and an unending debate about good and evil. Its influence is visible in Halloween costumes, specialized tourism, and even academic research, exploring the socio-cultural implications of the living dead. As a symbol, it signifies not only monsters, but also the contradictions of human nature. Our urge to break free of limitations, paired with the fear that such power might corrupt and destroy us. Hence, the vampire continues to captivate and inspire generation after generation. And so, we find ourselves at the end of this cinematic passage through the realm of vampires, a domain where shadows appear more alive than light, and where the thirst for blood merges with the thirst for knowledge. The vampire greets us at the boundary between life and death, between fascination and horror, between reality and imagination. Perhaps we will be left with unanswered questions. Do such creatures truly exist? Or are they mere reflections of our own fears and desires, enshrined in stories that never cease to intrigue us? Whatever the answer, the legacy of this myth cannot be denied. It is a summons from the night, an invitation to probe the limits of the human condition, to confront our terrors, and to allow ourselves to be swept away by the allure of an ancient enigma. And when the wind whistles among the trees and the moon slips behind the clouds, perhaps for just an instant, we will feel our hearts pounding faster. Because in the deep of night, when shadows dance in silence, nothing seems impossible. Not even the presence of an elegant creature of darkness, poised to feast on our fears and passions. And thus, our documentary draws to a close, leaving you with the unbroken echo of nocturnal shivers and the invitation to always look beyond appearances, there where a centuries-old myth still sharpens its fangs beneath the moon's tremulous glow.